The wind howls across the Nordic fjords, carrying with it the scent of salt, pine, and adventure. In this wild land, the Viking spirit was born, restless, daring, and unyielding. Long before their sails darkened European shores, the Vikings were farmers, fishermen, and craftsmen, bound by harsh seasons and long winters. Survival bred strength, and strength gave birth to ambition. In the quiet winters, stories of gods, monsters, and distant lands filled the smoky halls. These tales became more than entertainment. They were blueprints for courage and exploration. The Vikings were not merely raiders, they were dreamers. They looked beyond their cold horizons and imagined warmer lands, richer soil, and boundless seas waiting to be crossed. Their longships, slender yet sturdy, were more than vessels. They were symbols of freedom. Every timber spoke of skilled hands and minds that refused to be anchored to one place. The year 793 would change history forever. On a small island called Lindisfarne, the world first felt the shock of the Viking arrival. Swift, brutal, and unstoppable. But to see the Vikings only as destroyers is to miss half the story. For every village they burned, there was a market they built, a settlement they nurtured. Their courage was not born in battle alone. It was forged in icy waters, in storms that snapped masts, and in the quiet determination to push further than any before. These were people who navigated without maps, reading the stars and the sea like an open book. Their voyages were calculated risks, driven by a hunger for both wealth and wonder. The Norse world was ruled not only by chieftains, but by legends. Odin, Thor, and Freya shaped the Viking mind, where honor meant more than life itself. Every raid carried spiritual weight. Victory was a gift from the gods, and death in battle was not an end, but a ticket to Valhalla's endless feast. From the icy shores of Norway to the sunlit rivers of Constantinople, their presence could be felt, sometimes feared, sometimes welcomed, always remembered. Yet, for all their fame as warriors, the Vikings were also master traders. Amber, furs, and iron flowed from the north, exchanged for silver, silk, and spices from distant lands. In an age when most feared the sea, the Vikings made it their home. It was their highway, their battlefield, and their promise of something greater. Women, too, played a vital role in Viking life. Some stayed to keep farms running, others joined expeditions, and a few, like the legendary shield maidens, took up sword and shield themselves. The Viking Age was not a single story, but a tapestry. Each thread, war, trade, faith, and family, wove together a civilization unlike any other. It is easy to judge them by the blood they spilled, but their legacy also lies in the cities they founded and the cultural bridges they built. We remember them not because they existed, but because they dared to sail into the unknown and carve their names into the very edges of the world. And so, we set sail with them, into the cold mists of history, chasing the sound of oars, the creak of timber, and the unbreakable will of the Viking spirit. The Viking Age began in the late 8th century, born from the rugged landscapes of Scandinavia. Harsh winters and scarce resources shaped resilient people, prepared to seek fortune beyond their shores. Norway, Sweden, and Denmark were the Viking homelands. These lands offered breathtaking beauty, but little fertile soil. The sea became their lifeline, offering fish, trade, and paths to distant opportunities. Life in early Viking society revolved around small farming communities. Families worked together to cultivate crops, raise livestock, and craft tools. Winter's long nights forged a culture steeped in storytelling and deep tradition. Viking chieftains held power through loyalty and strength. Leadership was earned, not simply inherited, with warriors valuing courage, wisdom, and the ability to provide protection and prosperity to their people. Religion played a central role in Viking life. Belief in gods like Odin, Thor, and Freya influenced decisions, warfare, and exploration, creating a worldview that valued bravery and destiny above all. Runestones and carvings served as both art and communication. These inscriptions preserved family histories, victories, and dedications to the gods, giving us glimpses into the heart of Viking values. The Viking ship was their greatest achievement. Longships were fast, shallow drafted vessels capable of navigating both open seas and narrow rivers, giving Vikings unmatched mobility and tactical advantage. Shipbuilding was an art passed through generations. Every plank was carefully shaped, each joint fitted to withstand the pounding of waves, enabling journeys across treacherous oceans without modern navigational tools. Sailing skills were extraordinary. Vikings navigated using sunstones, star positions, and bird behavior. They read the color of the sea and the smell of the wind to guide their voyages. Raids were often seasonal. Farmers became warriors in summer, striking monasteries, towns, and villages before returning home with treasures, goods, and sometimes captives, who could be ransomed or integrated into society. The attack on Lindisfarne in 793 shocked Europe. Monks were slain, treasures stolen, and sacred sites desecrated, marking the moment when the Viking Age truly entered recorded history. While feared for violence, Vikings also engaged in peaceful trade. Markets grew where silver, furs, iron, and crafted goods changed hands, linking Scandinavia to far-reaching economies across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. Viking settlements began to appear along coasts and rivers. These served as both bases for raids and hubs for trade, cementing their influence in foreign lands. Homes in Viking villages were longhouses, wooden structures with central hearths for warmth. These spaces served as both family dwellings and places for feasts, storytelling, and political gatherings. Viking society valued skill in multiple roles. Warriors could also be farmers. Traders might be sailors. Versatility was essential for survival in their challenging and unpredictable environment. Clothing reflected practicality and artistry. Wool and linen garments kept people warm, while intricate brooches and jewelry signaled status, skill, and cultural pride. The Viking diet included fish, meat, bread, and dairy. Fermented beverages like ale were common at gatherings, strengthening community bonds and marking celebrations or religious festivals. Children learned survival skills early. Boys practiced with wooden weapons, while girls learned farming, weaving, and household management, roles that were equally respected in ensuring community survival. Law and order were maintained through assemblies called things. Free men gathered to resolve disputes, make political decisions, and ensure justice according to tradition and collective agreement. Viking expansion was partly driven by population growth. Limited farmland meant younger sons had to seek fortune elsewhere, fueling exploration, trade, and sometimes violent conquest. Their craftsmanship extended beyond ships. Metalwork, woodworking, and weaving produced goods both for daily use and trade, further strengthening their influence across regions. Viking warriors used weapons like spears, axes, and swords. Shields provided protection, while chainmail and helmets were reserved for those of higher wealth and status. Tactics combined surprise, speed, and mobility. Longships allowed lightning-fast strikes along rivers and coasts, often leaving before defenders could organize a response. Not all voyages were violent. Many were exploratory, seeking new lands, fertile soil, and trading partners, leading to settlements that would shape medieval Europe. The Vikings reached as far as Iceland, Greenland, and even North America. Their journeys expanded human knowledge of geography and trade networks, centuries ahead of other European powers. The seafaring culture fostered innovation. Advances in ship design, navigation, and resource management were born from the demands of long-distance travel and unpredictable seas. Viking art reflected their beliefs. Interlacing patterns, animal motifs, and mythological scenes adorned weapons, jewelry, and buildings, merging function with beauty. The early Viking raids evolved into something greater: expansion. By the 9th century, Norsemen were no longer content with hit-and-run attacks. They sought land, wealth, and permanent footholds beyond Scandinavia's harsh shores. Rivers became Viking highways. Their longships navigated deep inland, reaching towns and markets far from the coasts. The shallow draft allowed them to sail where larger ships dared not venture. In Ireland, they established fortified settlements, long forts, that grew into thriving towns like Dublin. These became hubs for trade, raiding, and political influence, reshaping the Irish coastlines for generations. England faced repeated assaults. The Anglo-Saxon kingdoms fell one by one, until the great heathen army arrived in 865, determined not just to plunder, but to conquer and settle. Viking leaders like Ivar the Boneless and Halfdan Ragnarsson carved territories from Saxon lands. The Danelaw emerged, a vast region under Norse control, blending Viking and Anglo-Saxon cultures. In the Frankish realms, rulers paid the dreaded Danegeld, a ransom of silver, to persuade Viking fleets to leave. But often, the same fleets returned the next season. Not all voyages led to war. Many Norsemen became traders, exchanging furs, amber, and walrus ivory for silver, silk, and spices from distant markets, as far as Byzantium and the Abbasid Caliphate. The East called to them as strongly as the West. Through Russia's rivers, Swedish Vikings, known as Varangians, linked the Baltic to the Black Sea, founding trade cities like Novgorod and Kiev. By the mid-9th century, some Varangians entered the service of the Byzantine emperors. The famed Varangian Guard became elite warriors, feared for their loyalty and ferocity in battle. Further west, Viking sails appeared in Spain and North Africa. These expeditions were perilous, facing not only hostile armies, but the fierce heat and strange diseases of foreign lands. The Faroe Islands and Iceland became stepping stones into the North Atlantic. Settlers braved stormy seas to claim new lands where free farmers could build without fear of kings. Iceland, founded around 874, became a society of independent chieftains. Here, the Althing, one of the world's oldest parliaments, emerged, reflecting the Vikings' deep respect for law and assembly. From Iceland, the Norse reached Greenland under Eric the Red. These settlements clung to the edges of icy coasts, surviving through farming, hunting, and trade with Europe. Leif Erikson, son of Eric the Red, sailed further still. Around 1000 AD, he reached Vinland, believed to be North America, centuries before Columbus set foot on its shores. Each voyage expanded the Viking world, connecting distant cultures. Whether through conquest, trade, or settlement, they transformed the medieval map in ways that still echo in history today. The Viking expansion was not reckless wandering, it was strategic. Harbors, river mouths, and fertile plains became prizes, chosen carefully for their economic and defensive advantages. Their settlements were often fortified, with earthen ramparts, timber walls, and watchtowers. These defended not only people, but trade goods and livestock, essential for long-term survival abroad. In conquered lands, Vikings adapted. They adopted local customs, languages, and even religions, blending Norse identity with the cultures they encountered, creating hybrid societies unique to each region. Some Vikings abandoned raiding entirely, becoming respected farmers, craftsmen, and merchants in their adopted homes. Their children often grew up speaking two languages, bridging worlds once separated by fear. Still, their reputation as raiders endured. Even peaceful traders carried weapons, for the medieval world was never free from conflict, and strength commanded respect. The Norse influence was not merely destructive, it spurred defensive innovations. Fortified towns, standing armies, and improved naval defenses in Europe arose largely as responses to the Viking threat. Viking ships brought more than warriors. They carried ideas, technologies, and goods that enriched the places they touched, from coinage systems to new art styles blending Norse and Christian motifs. This exchange was not always voluntary, yet it fostered connections across cultures that might otherwise have remained isolated for centuries. By the late 9th century, Viking expansion was at its peak. From the icy fjords to the warm Mediterranean, their influence stretched further than any Scandinavian could have imagined. They had mastered both war and trade, earning wealth in silver and land, and respect, however grudging, from rulers across Europe and beyond. The Viking Age was no longer a local phenomenon. It was a global force, altering political boundaries, economies, and cultures wherever its sails appeared. The Vikings were not merely raiders, they were settlers and traders, eager to establish lasting footholds far from their Scandinavian homelands, reshaping the political and cultural landscapes of the regions they touched. By the early 9th century, Viking fleets sailed regularly along European coasts. Some came to plunder, but many stayed, building winter camps that soon grew into permanent settlements. In Ireland, they founded thriving port towns like Dublin, Waterford, and Limerick. These became hubs of trade, blending Norse efficiency with Celtic craftsmanship and altering Irish life for generations. Across the Channel, Vikings targeted the wealthy riverside cities of the Frankish Empire. They sailed deep inland along the Seine, Loire, and Garonne, striking at Paris, Rouen, and Bordeaux. The Franks, under King Charles the Bald, tried to repel them, but Viking mobility and persistence proved difficult to counter. Rivers became highways for Norse ambitions, carrying them far from their coastal origins. Some Vikings became mercenaries for European rulers, hired to protect coasts or fight rival armies. Payment often came inland, creating the seeds of future Norse domains. In England, the great heathen army of 865 marked a shift from raiding to conquest. Led by leaders like Ivar the Boneless, they sought territory rather than plunder. They captured York, transforming it into a key Viking stronghold. From there, they controlled trade routes, levied taxes, and established a new Norse political presence in England's heartland. The Danelaw emerged, a swath of English territory under Viking law. Here, Norse customs, language, and farming methods mingled with Anglo-Saxon traditions, creating a unique cultural fusion. Further east, Swedish Vikings, the Varangians, followed rivers into the lands of the Rus, founding cities like Novgorod and Kiev. Their influence would shape the birth of early Russian states. In Scotland and the Isles, Vikings settled Orkney, Shetland, and the Hebrides, using them as strategic bases for both raiding and trading throughout the North Atlantic. Iceland became a Norse colony in the late 9th century. Settlers brought livestock, tools, and laws, establishing a society that valued independence and governance through the Althing, one of the world's earliest parliaments. From Iceland, adventurous sailors pressed further west to Greenland. Harsh, icy conditions challenged survival. Yet these colonies persisted for centuries, fueled by determination and the promise of trade. Around the year 1000, Leif Erikson ventured beyond Greenland, reaching a land he called Vinland, believed to be part of modern-day Newfoundland, Canada, marking the first known European contact with North America. These settlements were not only practical, they were symbols of Norse adaptability. Vikings could plunder, but they could also plant, build, and weave themselves into the fabric of new worlds. Wherever they settled, Norsemen influenced local art, architecture, and governance. They brought shipbuilding techniques, introduced new trade goods, and integrated their myths and traditions into the local cultural tapestry. The mingling of Norse and native traditions sometimes led to harmony, sometimes to conflict. Over time, identities blurred, creating hybrid cultures that bore the imprint of both Viking and local heritage. Marriage between Norse settlers and local populations further cemented these bonds. Children born of such unions carried dual identities, fluent in both languages and customs, bridging communities once divided by war. Viking markets thrived in these settlements. Merchants traded furs, walrus ivory, amber, and slaves for silver, silk, wine, and spices, linking Scandinavia to trade networks stretching as far as the Middle East. Longships still patrolled coasts and rivers, but settlements created stability. Farmers tilled new fields, fishermen worked new waters, and craftsmen built towns that echoed with hammers instead of battle cries. Religion traveled with the settlers. Pagan shrines rose beside Christian churches in some places, reflecting the gradual blending or clashing of beliefs during the early centuries of expansion. In some regions, Norse chieftains embraced Christianity for political advantage, easing alliances with local rulers and gaining access to broader trade and diplomatic networks. This expansion was not without resistance. Some local rulers waged relentless war against Viking intruders, forcing them to adapt strategies, seek alliances, or abandon territories altogether. Still, the Norse ability to adapt, to shift from raiders to rulers, from outsiders to integrated members of society, ensured their survival in diverse environments. By the mid-10th century, the Viking Age had evolved from swift raids to a complex tapestry of trade, settlement, and cultural exchange, setting the stage for the next era of Norse history. The Viking spirit of exploration was not bound to the west alone. To the east, vast rivers flowed deep into the heart of unknown lands, offering new opportunities for trade and conquest. From the Baltic Sea, Viking ships sailed toward what is now Russia, navigating the Neva, Volkhov, and Dnieper rivers. Their sleek longships, shallow-bottomed, could slip effortlessly between open sea and inland waters. These Norsemen, known as the Varangians, encountered Slavic tribes along the riverbanks. Sometimes they traded, sometimes they fought, but always they left a lasting mark on the peoples they encountered. The eastern voyages required not just courage, but cunning. Ships had to be carried over land between river systems, laborious portages that demanded teamwork, strength, and the resilience to endure grueling conditions. Trade was the heartbeat of these journeys. Furs, honey, wax, and slaves from the Slavic lands were exchanged for silver, silk, and spices from faraway Byzantine and Arab markets. One key settlement was Novgorod, a thriving hub where Norse and Slavic cultures blended. Here, Viking rulers, often seen as both protectors and conquerors, established early forms of governance and taxation. By the mid-9th century, the Varangian leader Rurik established control over the region, founding what would become the Kievan Rus, a powerful state with Viking roots and Slavic traditions. The Dnieper River served as the main highway to the Black Sea. This route, though profitable, was treacherous, with dangerous rapids and hostile tribes ready to strike unwary travelers. The Black Sea opened the door to Constantinople, the jewel of the Byzantine Empire. The Vikings called it Miklagard, the Great City, a place of wealth and splendor beyond their northern imagination. Their arrival often startled the Byzantines, but trade soon flourished. Norsemen sold furs, amber, and slaves, returning with gold, wine, and fine textiles, luxuries unheard of in their homelands. Some Varangians stayed, serving as mercenaries in the Byzantine army. This elite unit, the Varangian Guard, became famous for its loyalty and ferocity, guarding emperors for centuries to come. The Guard's warriors were prized for their towering stature, battle-hardened skill, and unwavering oaths. They wielded massive axes that became symbols of both their heritage and their deadly efficiency. Eastern expansion was not without danger. Fierce steppe nomads, treacherous river crossings, and the constant threat of betrayal meant that every voyage required sharp instincts and unyielding resolve. Still, the rewards outweighed the risks. Silver coins from the Arab world flowed into Scandinavia, fueling further exploration, raiding, and political ambitions back in the north. Archaeological finds in Sweden, such as the silver hoards of Gotland, revealed just how vast and profitable these eastern networks were for the Viking economy. Over time, these routes became arteries of cultural exchange. The Vikings brought home not only wealth, but new technologies, religious ideas, and artistic influences that reshaped Scandinavian society. Intermarriage between Norse settlers and Slavic peoples created a fusion of traditions, languages, and beliefs, laying the foundation for the multi-ethnic Kievan Rus state. Religious transformation was inevitable. Pagan rituals coexisted with the growing influence of Eastern Orthodox Christianity, especially as political alliances with Byzantium deepened. By the 10th century, Viking power in the East was firmly established. Kings and princes traced their legitimacy back to Norse ancestry, even as they embraced Slavic culture. The Viking presence extended far beyond politics. They introduced shipbuilding techniques, weapons, and trade practices that transformed the economic landscape of Eastern Europe. Legends of these eastern voyages spread back to Scandinavia. Young warriors dreamed of gold from Miklagard, of service in the Varangian Guard, and of carving their names into distant history. For the Vikings, the East offered more than wealth. It offered prestige. To have walked the streets of Constantinople was to have touched the heart of an empire. Even as their influence spread, the Vikings adapted to local customs. Many abandoned their raiding routes, becoming princes, merchants, and rulers in their adopted lands. This adaptability was key to their survival. Unlike in the West, where resistance often drove them away, in the East, they became part of the political and social fabric. The rivers that once served as lifelines eventually became boundaries, marking spheres of influence between rising Slavic powers and the remnants of Viking authority. By the late 10th century, Norse dominance began to wane. Local rulers consolidated power, and the role of the Varangians shifted from conquerors to hired allies. The Vikings' restless spirit drove them westward across the North Atlantic. seeking new lands beyond the familiar coasts of Scandinavia and the British Isles. Their first Atlantic discovery was the Faroe Islands, small and rugged, offering refuge and resources for sailors braving the open sea's dangers. From the Faroes, Viking explorers pressed onward, sailing through stormy waters to Iceland, a land of fire, ice, and endless horizons. Iceland was settled around 874 AD, quickly becoming a haven for Norse settlers escaping political turmoil and seeking freedom to farm and govern themselves. The settlers brought livestock, tools, and seeds, transforming Iceland's volcanic soil into farms that supported growing communities amidst a harsh environment. Icelandic society was unique, a blend of Norse traditions and radical governance through the Althing, one of the earliest parliamentary assemblies where laws were made and disputes settled publicly. The sagas, epic tales of heroes and gods, were born here, preserving history, law, and legend in poetic form, capturing the imagination of generations to come. From Iceland, the Norse looked further west, driven by curiosity and a hunger for new opportunities beyond the horizon. Eric the Red, exiled from Iceland, led the charge. He discovered Greenland around 982 AD, naming it to attract settlers despite its icy, challenging terrain. Greenland's coastline offered fjords and sheltered bays, perfect for Viking farming and hunting, but life was harsher than in Iceland, demanding resilience and adaptation. Settlements like the eastern and western colonies grew, sustaining themselves through farming, fishing, and trade with Europe, though isolation made survival precarious. Trade goods from Greenland, such as walrus ivory and seal skins, were prized in medieval Europe, connecting these remote settlements to global markets. Vikings in Greenland maintained contact with Iceland and Norway, traveling across icy seas in ships designed to withstand harsh North Atlantic conditions. The Norse settlers faced challenges: climate cooling, hostile Inuit peoples, and resource scarcity tested their endurance and ultimately contributed to the colony's decline. But Greenland's settlements endured for centuries, a testament to Viking determination and seafaring skill in one of the world's most extreme environments. Beyond Greenland lay Vinland, the land of wild grapes and fertile soil, described in sagas, likely located in modern Newfoundland, Canada. Leif Erikson, son of Eric the Red, led an expedition to Vinland around the year 1000, marking the first known European presence in North America. The Norse established temporary camps in Vinland, harvesting timber, hunting game, and encountering indigenous peoples, whom they called Skraelings. Conflicts with indigenous groups and distance from other Norse settlements limited Vinland's development into a permanent colony. Still, these voyages proved the Vikings' extraordinary navigational skills and thirst for exploration, predating Columbus by nearly 500 years. The North Atlantic settlements were not only outposts, but symbols of Viking adaptability, demonstrating how they could thrive far from home. These remote colonies maintained cultural links through storytelling, trade, and migration, keeping the Norse identity alive despite isolation. Women played vital roles in settling these lands, managing households, farms, and contributing to community governance, reinforcing the social fabric. The harsh climates demanded innovation. Turf houses insulated against cold communal labor for hunting and fishing, and resource sharing ensured survival. Religious practices evolved, blending Norse pagan rituals with Christianity as missionaries reached these distant lands, reflecting the wider spiritual transformation of Viking society. Communication between the North Atlantic colonies and mainland Scandinavia fluctuated, sometimes severed by weather or conflict, adding uncertainty to settlers' lives. The sagas preserve memories of these voyages and settlements, blending fact and myth into a rich oral tradition that shapes our understanding today. Although the Greenland colonies eventually faded in the 15th century, their legacy endures as a remarkable chapter in Viking history. The discovery of Vinland challenges traditional narratives of exploration, highlighting the Vikings' role as pioneers of transatlantic travel. Their North Atlantic expansion reflects a broader Viking theme: relentless curiosity, courage in the face of the unknown, and a drive to shape their destiny. From the fjords of Norway to the shores of Newfoundland, the Vikings pushed boundaries, geographical and cultural, laying foundations for the interconnected world to come. By the late 11th century, the Viking Age began to wane as changing political, religious, and economic factors reshaped Europe and Scandinavia. Christianization played a key role. Missionaries converted Viking leaders who saw political advantage in embracing the dominant faith of their neighbors. Kings like Olaf Tryggvason and Olaf Haraldsson in Norway adopted Christianity, encouraging their people to follow, blending faith with monarchy. The Church's influence brought new laws, literacy, and ties to Europe's growing Christian kingdoms, reducing Viking raids and fostering diplomacy. Stronger centralized states emerged in England, France, and the Holy Roman Empire, building armies and navies capable of repelling Viking attacks. Coastal defenses improved with fortified towns and castles, making raids less profitable and more dangerous for Viking raiders. Trade routes shifted. As peaceful commerce grew, Vikings increasingly became merchants and settlers rather than marauders. Internal changes also affected Scandinavia. Feudal structures replaced older clan systems, concentrating power and diminishing the decentralized warrior culture. Population pressures eased as agriculture improved and new lands were settled, reducing the need for raiding expeditions. Some Viking families rose to become kings of unified states, such as Denmark, Sweden, and Norway, fostering stability. The Norman conquest of England in 1066 marked a symbolic end to Viking expansion, as Norse-descended rulers integrated into European nobility. Many Vikings assimilated into local cultures, adopting languages, religions, and customs, their identities merging with those they once raided. Despite this, Viking heritage remained proud and influential, celebrated in sagas, art, and oral history passed through generations. Medieval chronicles began to depict Vikings not only as feared invaders, but also as founders, traders, and rulers. Viking legal traditions influenced emerging European laws, particularly concepts of assembly and justice through local councils. Their seafaring innovations revolutionized shipbuilding and navigation, laying foundations for future exploration centuries later. The Viking legacy lives in place names across the British Isles, Ireland, Normandy, and parts of Eastern Europe. Artifacts unearthed from graves and settlements tell stories of craftsmanship, trade, and daily life, bridging past and present. Museums today celebrate the complexity of Viking culture beyond stereotypes of berserkers and pillagers. Modern descendants proudly trace their lineage to Viking ancestors, embracing the resilience and adventure of their forebears. Viking mythology continues to inspire literature, film, and art worldwide, keeping ancient gods and heroes alive in popular imagination. Archaeological discoveries, like the Oseberg and Gokstad ships, reveal advanced maritime technology and artistic expression. Historical reinterpretations emphasize Vikings' roles as cultural transmitters, connecting Europe with the wider world. The Viking Age's end was not a collapse, but a transformation into the medieval kingdoms that shaped modern Europe. Their voyages opened new trade routes and cultural exchanges between Scandinavia, Europe, and beyond. The story of the Vikings reminds us of humanity's eternal quest for discovery, survival, and identity in an ever-changing world. Their spirit of exploration echoes in the great voyages of later centuries, from Columbus to Magellan and beyond. Though the longships have vanished, the Viking legacy sails on, in history, culture, and the enduring human drive to push boundaries. Understanding the Viking Age helps us appreciate the complexities of cultural interaction and the power of adaptation. Their history challenges simple labels, revealing a civilization rich in innovation, courage, and influence. The Vikings were more than warriors. They were builders, traders, explorers, and storytellers, leaving a profound mark on the medieval world. As we conclude this journey, we see the Viking Age as a testament to resilience and change, a chapter written on the waves of the North Atlantic. The Viking Age may have ended nearly 1,000 years ago, but its echoes still roll across the tides of history, shaping how we view courage, exploration, and cultural transformation. From the fjords of Norway to the green hills of Ireland, Viking footsteps have left a permanent imprint on landscapes and cultures, blending the fierce with the familiar in remarkable ways. Their longships may have been pulled ashore for the last time centuries ago, but their designs inspired shipbuilding innovations that would carry humanity to new worlds in the age of exploration. Viking sagas, once told in the flicker of firelight, remain a treasure of storytelling, blending history, legend, and moral lessons that resonate even in our modern age of instant communication. These seafarers were not just warriors, they were bridge builders between civilizations, connecting the far corners of Europe and beyond through trade, language, and shared traditions. Their adaptability ensured their survival. When raiding lost its appeal, they became farmers, kings, merchants, and settlers, weaving themselves into the very fabric of the lands they once attacked. Through intermarriage, alliances, and shared governance, the Vikings became part of the kingdoms they once threatened, proving that enemies can become partners in shaping the future. The spread of Christianity among the Norse reshaped their worldview, merging old myths with new beliefs, creating a unique cultural tapestry still visible in Scandinavian traditions today. Their decline was not a dramatic fall, but a slow transformation, a shift from warrior bands to organized kingdoms with centralized power and diplomatic ties. The legacy of the Vikings is as complex as their history, marked by both violence and vision, destruction and development, conquest and cooperation. Archaeological finds, ornate brooches, rune stones, ship burials remind us that behind the helmets and swords were craftsmen, poets, and thinkers who valued beauty as much as battle. Place names across Britain, Ireland, and Normandy whisper the Viking presence, anchoring them forever in the geography of Europe. Even their enemies came to respect their skill, resilience, and leadership, acknowledging that the Norse spirit was not easily broken or forgotten. In today's world, the Viking ethos, bold exploration, risk-taking, and innovation, still inspires entrepreneurs, adventurers, and dreamers to push past boundaries. Their myths of Odin, Thor, and Freya continue to find life in books, films, and games, proving the timeless power of storytelling to cross centuries. The Viking Age teaches us that history is rarely simple. Cultures are defined not just by battles fought, but by the exchanges and ideas they leave behind. As the North Sea winds once filled Viking sails, so too does their story fill our imaginations, urging us to see the world as a horizon to be explored. Though the longships are gone, the spirit of the Vikings still navigates the human heart, searching, striving, adapting, and leaving a mark that no tide can wash away. The Viking Age may be over, but the journey they began, the human quest for connection, discovery, and legacy, sails on, carried by each new generation willing to face the unknown.